I'll say it right off the bat. If you have kids, and even if you don't, you can probably imagine that cooking with them can be very messy, time-consuming, and wasteful, turning the whole thing into a pretty stressful experience. I know because my 2-year-old wants to be involved in absolutely everything I do, and so she has spent a ton of time with me in the kitchen. In this video, I want to share with you the 10 lessons and tips that I've learned over the past year that have helped me actually enjoy cooking with my toddler. And just as a disclaimer, you won't get to actually see her in this video. Me and my partner have agreed that we don't want our kid and soon to be kids to be involved in these videos, and so we keep them out of the picture. Okay, my tip number 1 may sound a little bit strange, but find your why. Here's what I mean. If you're having to do something that's difficult, it always helps to know what your motivation is and to keep reminding yourself. Why do you want to do the thing that's hard? Why do you want to learn a new skill? Why do you want to do a job that might be stressing you out? In this particular instance, and for me personally, my why do I want to spend time cooking with my toddler? I first and foremost want to encourage her curiosity. In my experience, curiosity is one of the best traits to have for life. It has helped me in so many situations, and it has, I would say, made me a better person. And so that's something that I know I definitely want to encourage in my toddler as well. And so this, of course, doesn't apply just to the kitchen. I kind of think about this in general, and that's my number 1 why. But there are other things. Of course, I want her to get a, I would say, closer, hopefully positive relationship with food, just to see how food is made, that it's not some magic trick that all of a sudden there is a plate of food appearing on the table in front of her. So that's probably the second biggest one. But there are, of course, other things as well. Like I can see that she's building new skills as she's helping me in the kitchen. She's learning new vocabulary because there is, of course, a ton of stuff that we're talking about and describing. I have also heard many times, although I'm not sure if that really is the case, that it really helps when your kids are cooking with you to help them not become picky eaters. That because they're there from like the very start and they get to see the food, how the food is made, maybe they're tasting it along the way, it just helps them be more comfortable, I guess, with the food. Again, I can't really say. It's not like I have 2 kids, one that I cook with and the other that I don't. So I don't have a comparison, but I definitely would say that my toddler is not a picky eater. Of course, there are things that she doesn't like, but in general, she will eat like 90% of all the foods that we give her. So find your why. Those were my examples. Yours can be totally different, but it really helps in those stressful moments to breathe in and just to remind yourself, I want to do this because da-da-da. All right, let's talk about a few more things that you kind of think about before you actually get to the cooking part. So my second point is helpful equipment. And here what I would say is I have absolutely no like child-sized cooking equipment. I don't buy any like kids' utensils. I find that they are just not needed. We're perfectly fine doing everything without them. I would think that they, like, to me, they just sound like extra stuff, extra clutter that I would have to clean up afterwards, that I would have to store somewhere and kind of manage, and there would just be more things around us in the kitchen, and that just, to me, personally, that sounds like more stress. So that's why I don't do anything special in terms of that equipment. But there is one thing that I would recommend, that is if you have the room for it and the money for it. And I actually have to get down on the floor for this to properly show you. some kind of a stool. This is, or a learning tower, I guess they call it as well. I'm not sure if it has other names in other countries, but something that is made for the purpose of kids climbing up on it and standing at the counter or at the kitchen table or something like that. And why I would recommend this is because for me personally, I wanted to start pretty early, like as soon as my baby turned maybe around 1, even before that, when she could stand up on her own. She wasn't even walking. Because she was so into all of these things, she, again, wanted to be part of it. And so it was really nice to have something that's super secure that she could climb into. It has the little back that's protecting her from, falling backwards. It's really easy for her to climb into. This part, actually, in this particular stool or learning tower, it has 3 different levels that you can put this into. And so as your child grows, you can just keep changing the height of this so that they're always at the best height to reach the countertop. And again, I would say get something like this if you have the room for it, because it is like a pretty, it's like you do have to have room to put this in. And they're not always the cheapest thing to buy. I'm sure that there are lots of different options out there. I have seen a ton when I was purchasing this one. So a lot of it was also on my kind of design, what I wanted it to look like. And how like some of them can be very bulky, and that just seemed like more work to have it stored somewhere. And yeah, anyways, so that would be the one thing in terms of equipment that I would suggest that you think about. You can, of course, just use your dining chair or some kind of steps to help your child reach the counter. But this is so much more convenient because in our case, I will just quickly show you, these are our dining chairs. And so one thing is they are they have like a tall back. And so if I were to push this up against the counter, there's all of this in the way. Plus, they have these white cushions on the seat, so not the ideal thing for dirty little feet to be standing up on top of these. I have also found that with other chairs that we have in like different, like in our country house, they are very slippery. And so that was another reason why it just wasn't ideal using that. So I feel like the learning tower can give you a lot of peace of mind that your child is relatively safe standing up on it. All right, my tip number 3 is declutter your counters, or really think about if what you have on the counter is absolutely necessary. And I'm not a great example of that because we do have a lot of stuff on this counter right here. But so what I do just before we are about to cook here, I will usually put this whole tray away, because as soon as my toddler gets bored, this sugar, that's getting spilled all over this counter. So if it were just up to me, we do live with our parents, so some of this stuff, it's what they use. So if it were just up to me, I probably wouldn't have this here. Another thing, just as an example, I'll usually unplug the kettle, because she really likes pushing all the buttons. And of course, if there isn't any water in there, and even if there is, like, it will start boiling. So I don't want that happening. So declutter your counters. The less stuff there is, the less mess your kids are going to make. I've briefly mentioned safety with the learning tower, but this is my next tip. When it comes to safety, I feel like there are 2 main aspects to that in the kitchen. One is things that are hot, such as the stove or the oven, and things that are sharp. So how I've done this and kind of reduced my own stress about, the fear of my child getting hurt is, one thing, or the approach that I take is I try to teach her how to behave around those things. Rather than constantly trying to keep an eye on her, I try to explain to her and teach her what would happen if she were to touch something that's hot or touch something that's sharp. So with the hot, that has been pretty easy, I feel like, because she got the concept pretty quickly, because she, burned her mouth a couple times on food that was a little bit too hot, or some drinks, or sometimes when we go wash her hands in the sink, the water comes out really hot from the sink. And so, she knows what it feels like when something burns. Like, nothing serious ever happened to her, of course, but she understood the concept of when something is hot and that she doesn't like it and she doesn't want to, she needs to be careful around it. So that's how I've been managing this and this situation here. And also, I'm always making sure that I'm the one who's closer to the hot surface. So if we're working down here, then I'm standing right here next to the stovetop and my toddler is standing on the other side. So it's very unlikely that she would be able to reach all the way to the stovetop. When it comes to the knives, that's the one that's a little bit more tricky, I feel like, because the way I've been teaching her is that, it's sharp and it can hurt her, right? That she will have a little cut or something. But it's not like she has, that has never really happened. She has never really cut herself. Of course, she has fallen down and, scratched her knees. So she knows kind of when she gets a little hurt and what that feels like. So that's why I feel like she knows what this means as well. But that's the one where I'm still just making sure that the knives are more out of reach for her and that she understands that it's only mommy who's handling the knives. One thing on that though, again, sticking with the topic of her learning rather than me just prohibiting it. She just turned 2, and for her second birthday, I got her these this I guess is the only kids sized equipment that we just got. It's these kids knives, essentially. They're used just like this. So for cutting bananas, cucumbers, something that's easy to cut like this. And that's where I want to start teaching her how to handle a sharp tool. Because I feel like now at 2 years, she's ready for that. So kind of judge how ready your kids are for all of these steps. Now, of course, even though I'm taking all these precautions and teaching her, I know that accidents can happen. And what is also helping me deal with that possibility is knowing that I'm ready. I have a first aid kit where I have this special gel for burns. I have all the Band-Aids and all the equipment that you need to take care of a kid's wound. I know what I would do if something were to happen. And so that really helps as well. So try to get yourself mentally ready for that possibility so that you're not panicking in the moment, not knowing what to do if your child's hand gets burned or cut. All right, we are halfway there with tip number 5, which is assess if you and your child are ready. It's about dinner time or whatever you're getting ready to cook. Think about, is this the right time to involve my child? And I know that not always you will have the option to not involve them. Like I said, my child wants to be involved all the time, but there are things that I can do, ways that I can occupy her in some other place so that she doesn't come into the kitchen with me. And so what I mean with the assessing is assess your own mood. That has been really important for me, especially during this pregnancy where often I would just feel sick and tired and I was in no state to be ready to have my toddler in the kitchen with me. Same thing, the child themselves, are they in a good mood or have they been fussy the whole day? If they have been fussy, I'm guessing you're not going to have a good time cooking with them. Or maybe you just really need to get things done very quickly, in which case, again, not the best idea to invite them in for this activity. And this is connected to my tip number 6, which is have other activities on hand. So if you decide that you don't want to involve your child in the kitchen, how are you going to occupy them? And this, for me, I'm happy to admit, this is where the TV comes in most of the time. It doesn't happen very often, maybe 2-3 times a week, but there are times when either it's not a good idea right from the start to have her with me, and so I'll get a kids show on for her to watch, or she will be here with me for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then get bored, and then she wants me to go play with her in her room while I have the second half of dinner to make. And so that's when I have to occupy her in some other way. Of course, the TV is not the only solution, but I'll just say that I'm glad that we live in a modern society where we have that option. Other things are just have something in the kitchen that they can get their hands into. And I'll show you down here. We've got this drawer that's full of these plastic wraps and clasps and bags and all these things, and she loves going through that drawer. So having something like that. I've also seen people have drawers where they have all these plastic containers or cups and things like that. Those are great, and kids can have a lot of fun with them. I also have a glass. I can show you. I've got these ceramic balls, which I normally use for cooking, for baking. And I've introduced these at a point when, of course, my baby was no longer putting things in her mouth, but she loves taking these out of the jar, putting them into a different jar, or pouring them into a sieve, or, I'll give her a couple other things where she can just transfer these into some other containers, and she's very happy with that activity too. Okay, so we've gotten to a point that you are ready. Your child is ready. You're about to start cooking. Here is my tip number 7. Give them tasks. I mean, this is the reason why they want to be there with you. They want to be involved. They want to do stuff. And in my experience, it's best if you give them as many directions and ideas what they can do as you can, so that they don't just start, throwing stuff all around and putting their hands into everything. It's really best to think of small things. They can be tiny things. Of course, the older the kids are, the more capable they are of doing different things. But here is a whole example of all the things that I do with her. So a lot of times we do baking together, which I find is a very good activity in this regard, because she's taking out the bowls from the drawer, putting them on the counter. Then we take out the scales. She's pushing the buttons on the scales. She's pouring something into the mixing bowl. And there, I'll show you, and I mean, if you've seen my videos, you know what these look like. I have these really big jars with flours and sugars. I'm not gonna let her handle this on her own. I'm too scared that she would just drop it and there would be glass everywhere. But she's very happy if I'm pouring it into the jar and I ask for her help. And what she will literally do is stick her hand to the bottom of the jar and not even push. She's just putting her hand on the jar and she feels like she's pouring it in together with me. So these tiny things, same thing with pouring, pouring milk into it, cracking eggs. So every time we're cracking eggs into it, I let her do the first little crack, and then, I do the rest of that job of like opening the egg and putting it into the bowl. On the other side, the other counter here, this is where we usually prep all sorts of vegetables. So that's where I will ask her to, for example, put the peels into the little compost bin. I'll ask her to take the cut up vegetables and throw them into a pot or something. There are just so many things to wipe up any spills. She loves handling, the towels and wiping up surfaces. I will try to, like, any kind of transferring things. So like I've mentioned, transferring that into the pot, or I will just grab like an extra bowl and ask her to put one thing into a bowl and another thing into a pot and kind of sort them out. All of these things are very, very small, but they just occupy them so well. And so that is like, this whole tip is probably my biggest one for you, or the one that has worked really, really well for me. So try to think as you're cooking, can I ask her to do this little thing or that little thing? Or what are the other ideas that you can come up with that your kids can actually do on their own or together with you? Tip number 8, and this is not necessarily just cooking related, but if there are things that they cannot do, what has worked really well for me is explain the consequences as much as I can. So again, we've talked a little bit about this with the safety, but same thing if, for example, she wants to handle, again, the flour on her own. I'll just try to explain to her that it needs to be me who handles it so that all of the flour goes into the bowl and we don't spill anything, because look here, the flour is all over the counter and we don't want that. And just try to explain as much as I can. And again, I'm just used to doing this because I do this all the time. If my toddler doesn't want to have a jacket on, then I'll touch her hands and I'll show her, look, your hands are cold. We need to put a jacket on. And she just puts it on. So it kind of just translates into the kitchen for me as well, a little bit more naturally. And this is really how I avoid the tantrums and her being angry that she's not allowed to do something, because she understands. And again, you have to kind of put some effort into explaining this in terms that they will understand, and that very much depends on each child individually. Like, some will get bigger concepts than others, so you just have to figure out what works for your kids. My tip number 9, and this might be a little bit controversial, let them taste things. With the exception of maybe raw meat, I feel like there isn't really anything that I'm cooking with that could cause any serious harm if she just eats a little bite of it. If it's raw dough, if it's a garlic clove, if it's I don't know what, like that you normally wouldn't eat raw or uncooked, I let her have a taste of it, because again, this is part of the why. I want her to be curious. I want her to want to try new things and taste things. Yes, I will warn her beforehand when she's like trying to eat something that I know is not probably going to be very pleasant to eat, that it's not a good idea, but I still let her do it. Of course, I'm not letting her eat a fistful of raw dough. It's usually like a tiny little bite or something, and like she will put it in her mouth and very soon figure out that it's not something that she wants to do again. Or again, going back to the previous tip, I will explain the consequences. I'll explain that her tummy will hurt and that we need to cook it first, and if we cook it, it's going to be better. And that's why we don't want to eat it beforehand. With the raw meat, I do try to keep it out of her mouth. So what I do with the raw meat is I tell her that she's allowed to touch it, but she's not allowed to eat it, because if I wouldn't let her even touch it, I mean, she sees me handling it all the time, so it's not going to make all that much sense to her. So I would let her touch it, but I would then explain to her, like, now we're done touching the meat and we have to go wash our hands, and we go wash the hands. So that's kind of how I handle this. Or I'll just, again, try to have her occupied with something else while I deal with the raw meat. So just as maybe like a final thought on this point particularly, I feel like a lot of moms are worried what's going to happen to their children if they eat a slice of an onion. I just have this very relaxed approach to it. It's like, it's not going to rip her stomach open. It's not like, sure, she might be in some pain, maybe it's going to cause some stomach issues or, whatever, but it's not like dangerous, not like the raw meat where, like you don't want them to be eating a piece of raw chicken. I definitely don't want that. But again, a piece of an onion, a little piece of raw dough, it's not going to do all that much. Like, it might make her uncomfortable or even in a little bit of pain, but oh well, she needs to learn. She needs to learn that it's not a good idea to eat raw dough. All right, and we are finally at my tip number 10, which is to let go of perfection. And this one might be the hardest one for me to do. What I mean with this, letting go of perfection and just in general, having a lot of patience. They spilled the flour all over the counter. Breathe for 3 seconds and then it's okay. You can clean it up. Even if something breaks, obviously try not to use things that are very precious to you when cooking with your small kids. My glass jars with flour, I mean, while I don't want them to get broken, they're not something super precious to me. And if that were to happen, oh well, I'll just get some new ones. And same thing with like the actual food that you're preparing. If the cookies are all misshapen and different sizes, just let go. Let go. And again, this point is so much connected to the very first one. Remind yourself why you're doing this. You're not involving your child so that you can cook the perfect meal. You're involving your child for whatever reason you have chosen, and they're getting that out of the experience, even if the cookies are all different shapes. So again, that's one where I have to get better at this and remind myself. For me, it's not so much the food. Well, no, it's also the food. I like my food to be pretty and the same size, but it's also just the mess and, being wasteful. I would very much like to avoid as much of that as possible. And I feel like I have actually been doing a pretty good job at that. Like, my kitchen doesn't get destroyed when my child is cooking in here with me. It might be a lot of stuff on the floor, like pots from the pans and like what I've shown you, the plastic cups from the drawer, but all of those are a 2-minute cleanup and it's done. So, but still, I feel like I could do better with just being more chill. And so those have been my 10 tips on how to make cooking with toddlers less stressful and more joyful in the kitchen. I hope you found them valuable. I was actually surprised that I was not able to find any video like this when I was searching for it on YouTube myself. So again, I hope you found it helpful and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye.